What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Metal Maniacs podcast. I'm Jay Ingersoll, and on today's episode, we're going to dive into a band that I've been a fan of for a long time, but they kind of had a short-lived experience as a band. And I got a lot of good feedback on some of the shorts that I posted about this band. So we are going to dive into a biography of Nothingface. So if you're a fan of Nothingface, you know what I'm talking about. But before we jump into that, please support our sponsor, Dave Stark at Stark Real Estate. They do real estate right. Click the link below for all your real estate needs. If you want early episodes or bonus episodes, join us over on Patreon. Also, the link below. Join us on Discord. Give us a review on your favorite streaming platform. And please, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, leave a comment, share with a friend. We really appreciate it. It helps the show grow. So on to the show. All right, y'all. So we haven't done a biography episode in a while, but it was something that I really wanted to do when we first started the show. So I thought this would be a good one because this band is kind of an underground legendary band, and I thought it would be cool to do an episode about these guys. I got a lot of good feedback on some of the other talking points that we had on shorts or clips about this band. So I was like, well, let's just do a whole biography about this band. It won't be a super long one, but we'll get into it here. I try to accumulate all the information that I could find on the internet, watch whatever interviews or videos or live footage that I could, which there is some, but there isn't a whole lot. But if you're not familiar with Nothingface, oh man, what an awesome band. I absolutely love these guys. And there will be a corresponding episode either dropping this next week or the following week where I actually rank the Nothingface albums, so you can learn a lot more in depth about the albums. We'll go over the albums here, but let's get into this. So, Nothingface. You know, some bands are built to be famous. Others are just built to be real. Nothingface was definitely real. Born out of Washington, D.C. / Maryland, in the metal underground scene in the early 1990s, Nothingface spent the better part of a decade being almost as big as they deserved to be, only to have the industry, fate, and their own internal storms swallow them whole before they could fully grasp what they had. Kind of a sad story, especially with how great this band was. So, early bio, 1994 drummer Chris Hawk placed an ad in a local Baltimore publication called Rocks Magazine, looking for musicians who were serious about making heavy music. Guitarist Tom Maxwell, who was living in Baltimore at the time, saw the ad and reached out. Rather than setting up an audition on the spot, Tom sent him a tape, a recording of material that he had already been working on. Chris was living in Damascus, Maryland, with bassist Bill Gall at the time, and when that tape arrived, both of them knew immediately what they had. They got together, started jamming on covers like Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Jane's Addiction, and the chemistry locked in fast. Sometimes you just know when you lock in with some people, especially if you're a musician and you're watching this episode. And the bones of the band were formed, the skeleton, so to speak. The original lineup also included vocalist David Gabbard, and the four of them wasted no time recording and releasing 3 demo tapes in this configuration. Those early recordings leaned heavily into the grunge side of things and a little more of the hard rock side of things, but it was kind of a far cry from what the metal crushing groove band that they would become. They were definitely trying to find their sound. A shift came in 1995 when Gabbard exited the band over creative disagreements, assuming, just my assumptions, that he wanted to be more grunge rock. The rest of the guys, they wanted to be more on the metal aspect of things. So it really wasn't a direction that Gabbard wanted to follow, was the heavy side of things. So the band went with a different path. The replacement arrived in a way that felt almost fated. Matt Holt had been recording at Chris and Bill's Damascus house with his own project, Ingredient 17, a band that he shared with none other than Tommy Sickles, who later will resurface in this story you'll see. But Tommy Sickles also stayed tight with the band and ran like lights and was real close with the band in other ways. And you'll see how he comes back up in this story. Also, there is actually an interview out there with Tommy Sickles that wasn't done not terribly too long ago. And it was a pretty cool interview because you got to see some insight and get some firsthand knowledge of this band, because there's not a lot out there. Because when this band was formed, there was just the VHS tapes recording, just very minimal grainy footage here and there. We didn't have the cell phones. We didn't have the high quality cameras and all the things that we do now, and in order to be able to catch these bands' performances, and everybody's doing interviews, and obviously you're listening to the show. So yeah, we do interviews too. So, let's see here. So, Tom Maxwell heard what Matt was doing in those sessions and immediately recognized something, a voice that could handle what Nothingface was becoming. Maxwell made the call, and Holt stepped in. According to Tom Maxwell, the definitive lineup of Nothingface officially came together on May 5th, 1995. From that date forward, the band that the world would come to know and that far too would ever fully discover was a real thing. The band coalesced around Damascus, Maryland, circa 1994, with the core lineup eventually solidifying around Matt Holt, Tom Maxwell, Bill Gall, and Chris Hawk. The D.C., Maryland area had always been a crucible for heavy music, a scene defined by hardcore aggression and artistic defiance, and Nothingface absorbed all of it. They weren't trying to be the next Korn or the next Pantera. They were trying to be Nothingface, which in retrospect made them one of the most singular and frustrating stories in the late 1990s metal scene. Matt Holt himself was particularly bred for this life, born on May 28, 1977 in Washington, D.C. He picked up a guitar at age 5 and reportedly stepped in front of a microphone as a lead vocalist for the first time at around 16. His vocal approach would become the band's most defining and divisive weapon, a dual-register style capable of haunting melodic clean passages and savage guttural aggression, sometimes within the same breath. We call that kind of a Fry scream. He kind of had this mid-range. He didn't do a lot of the vocal Olympics, but he had a very awesome compare and contrast to his vocals. It was definitely something honest, and an old interview I pulled up with Matt, he definitely said, they asked him like what his band sounded like or what his band was, and he just said metal. And I think that's good, because there's a lot of monikers out there. There's Nothingface new metal, or are they this, are they that? Yeah, they came up around that scene and they had some of those vibes, but end of day, Matt always called it metal, and I'm just good with calling it metal because it was great and it's metal. So, the debut. Nothingface released their self-titled 10-song debut in 1995, a raw but earnest statement of intent that planted the flag of Nothingface. It wasn't the record that would define them, but it introduced the world to a band with a heavier-than-average riffs, a vocalist with serious range, and an underlying emotional intensity that didn't fit anything else that existed inside of a box. After D-Side, D-C-I-D-E. So D-Side is a privately held Washington, D.C.-based independent record label and distributor. The label was started the summer of 1995 by founding partners Jeffrey B. Claiborne and Burton Gray and Mark Thrupp. Their first act, Nothingface, sold over 500,000 records worldwide and is widely recognized as one of the standard bearers for the nu metal genre. I didn't really see many other bands that were recognizable on their site, but I could be wrong, but that was just a little explanation of what Decide was. So it says, after Decide found them and re-recorded the 7 songs for the follow-up, Pacifier, released in 1996/1997. It really turned the lens inward in deeply personal ways. You could tell on the lyrics on this album, and like I said, on the next few subsequential episodes, we will go over the band's albums, and we'll rank them, and we'll talk a little bit more about the albums. Basically, this album confronted the demons of Matt Holt's childhood, like themes of abuse, damage, and survival running through the core of the record. This was not shock value heavy metal. This was basically Matt just pouring out the worst chapters of his early life into music and daring listeners to take and engage with it. Pacifier earned the band a dedicated underground following, and it introduced the critical community to the idea that Nothingface were doing something emotionally weightier than most of their contemporaries. Reviews were mixed. The metal press hadn't quite figured out where to put them because, as metal guys, we always looked somewhere to put stuff. But, I think it's just to find it later, like I've said before. But the fans who found Nothingface during this period tended to hold on for life. That kind of loyalty isn't bought. It's earned track by track, and it shows. So coming on into 1998, if Pacifier showed what Nothingface could be, an audio guide to an Everyday Atrocity showed what they actually were. It remains one of the most underrated heavy metal albums of the entire era, and I stand by that statement. Such a fantastic album. I absolutely love this album. Man, it was so good. Released on September 22nd, 1998, recorded at the Private Playboy Club in Baltimore and issued through Decide/Templar label group, Everyday Atrocity was the record where all the pieces locked into place. The lineup of Holt, Maxwell, Gall, and Huck finally fused into something greater than the sum of its parts. Whereas, as a band and early on, you might all kind of have your own style and you're trying to figure out your sound. It felt like these guys were super cohesive and they found exactly what they wanted to sound like on this record. Tom Maxwell's guitar work here deserves enormous credit. Definitely intricate rhythmic passages that drew comparisons to both Clutch and Pantera, which is a short way of saying he could groove and brutalize simultaneously, and he knew how and exactly when to do each. Great dynamics on this album, great guitar riffs. Critical reception was exceptional. AllMusic awarded it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Chronicles of Chaos scored it 9 out of 10. Lollipop magazine called it one of the best releases of 1998, praising its ability to merge brutality with genuine melody in ways that recalled both Earth Crisis and Fugazi, a combination of very few bands that would even attempt without falling apart at the seams. Standout tracks like Goldtooth, Graining, So Few, and The Sick, and I Diablo showcased the band had mastered dynamics. Great dynamics in these. I love the way this album opens because he does like all heavy vocals on the first song, which I believe is Goldtooth. The second song, he comes in, I believe it's Grinning. He comes in with a mix of the heavy vocal and the clean, and then you go into the third, which I also believe is So Few, and that one is all clean. So he kind of does all heavy, a mix in the middle, and then all cleans on the third track. So it kind of gives you a good definition of his range throughout, with the vocals being a very standout part of this album. It was heavy when it needed to be heavy, punishing, melodic, real melodic at times, and it really connects deeply. His lyrical voice was maturing. Matt's lyrical voice was maturing into something genuinely literary. Observations of societal dysfunction, personal alienation, and the question of God's existence were things that stuck out to me of some of the themes that they talked about. And the album clocks in at just under 38 minutes, but leaves an impression significantly larger than that. Basically, you're like, I wish there was more. But it is front to back an incredible album. Everyday Atrocity should have been the record that made Nothingface a household name in heavy music, but unfortunately it didn't really do that for them. And the gap between quality and commercial outcome would become the defining theme of their career. The band toured in support of the album through the United States with Stuck Mojo, awesome band, Sam Black Church, Helmet, and Ministry. So they got on some great shows, and they were starting to build their following through being able to open for these bigger bands, right? So by the turn of the millennium, nu metal was the absolute apex of its commercial power. Bands were signing 7-figure deals on the strength of demo tapes and playing arenas within 6 months of album sales under their belts. Korn was the one that kind of started this nu metal thing, and they got big. Deftones was right there with them. And then it just kind of got bigger and bigger as it goes. And this is about the time where all of this is coming to head, 1999 and 2000 with Limp Bizkit. And nu metal was the thing and the new trend in metal. Nothingface, having paid serious dues and built real credibility, found themselves signed to TVT Records, the same label that had helped break Nine Inch Nails, and would go on to host Seven Dust and others, and went to Vancouver, British Columbia to record what would become their most commercially successful work, Violence. Violence was released on June 5th, 2000, and in a crowded field of heavy releases that year, it stood out exactly for the reason you'd want. It was genuinely violent, in the best sense of the word. The band spent 6 weeks tracking the record in Vancouver, and the result was their most sonically imposing work to date. Dense, aggressive, and meticulously produced without sacrificing the raw edge that made them compelling. Violence was a great record. I remember when it came out, took a little adjusting to get used to because it's a little bit of a longer record, but so many bangers, and it really grew on me as well, because sometimes when you love something so much, like I love Everyday Atrocity, you expect Everyday Atrocity Part 2, and that doesn't always happen, but Violence was still awesome. The album actually peaked at number 27 on the Billboard Top Independent Albums chart and moved approximately 87,000 copies in the United States. Significant numbers for the band operating without a major mainstream radio support. Tracks like Bleeder, Can't Wait for Violence, and Unsettling for All of the Sin, which famously wove in an audio sample of Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. That's one thing I always liked about Nothingface. They had a way of weaving in these different samples and different sounds throughout that kind of added an extra element than just the bass guitars, drums, and vocals that a lot of bands kind of did. And it really was able for them to take a little more creative approach to some of the music. The single Bleeder climbed to number 32 on the mainstream rock chart, giving the band their most significant radio moment to date. The album itself peaked at number 24 on the Heat Seekers chart and 37 on the Top Independent chart. The kind that was supposed to be a launch pad rather than a ceiling, definitely for traction for them. The band described Violence themselves as the soundtrack for the end of the world. That's not hyperbole. It's a record that sounds like civilizational dread filtered through heavy distorted guitars, and it arrived at the moment in American culture just before 9/11 reordered everything. That made sense of the impending catastrophe feel prophetic rather than theatrical. Nothingface hit the road in support of Violence in a major way. They secured a slot at Ozfest, one of the premier heavy music touring festivals of the era, and most significantly landed a supporting run with Pantera, the gold standard of the early 2000s heavy touring. Playing some of those rooms night after night with Dimebag and Phil, also watching from the wings, should have been a launch pad to the next level for these guys, you would think. And then just another interesting fact about the Violence record, which was kind of weird and kind of confusing. It labeled all of the guys on there, and then it said introducing Tommy Sickles. So this is where Tommy Sickles comes back into the band. So it had the four main guys on there, which was Matt, Chris, Bill, and Tom. So Chris recorded drums on it, but for some reason on the back of the album it says introducing Tommy Sickles on drums. And we'll get into why here in just a second. Hey guys, just want to jump in here real quick and remind you that on August 14th and August 15th, Michigan Metal Fest is happening at the Leela Arboretum in Battle Creek, Michigan. This is a 2-day fest. On Friday, you got Green Jelly, Psycho Stick, and Crossbreed headlining, and a handful of others. And then on Saturday, you got 2 stages. On the fountain stage, you got Monochromatic Black, Hemlock, Rose Funeral, Gore Pig, just to name a few, and a few bands that have been on the show, like Ghost in Motion, Let It Rot, and some others. And then on the main stage on Saturday, you got the X-Faces, the Killer's Confession, and Ventana as your headliners. You also got Casket Robbery that's been on the show, and Kill Crown that's also been on the show, and a handful of others. So 2 days of awesome metal. Make sure you go over to MichiganMetalFest.net, get your tickets and your VIP packages and all your awesome merch that they have over there. So August 14th, August 15th, Leela Arboretum, Battle Creek, Michigan Metal Fest. Check it out. Now we have a little time here between Violence and moving on to the next record. So the years between 2000 and 2003 were brutal for the band in ways that went far beyond normal rock and roll turbulence. Internal tensions, personal struggles among members, and the kind of grinding industry friction that wears good bands down like sandpaper all converged simultaneously. Jerry Montano passed through the lineup on bass during this period. The drum seat was one of the first things to ship. By the time the band finally entered the studio for album 4, Tommy Sickles had taken over. So that's why Tommy was introduced behind the kit, and it was his only appearance on the Nothingface record, which is Skeletons, what we're going to talk about. But also behind the scenes, the record came with a painful footnote. Drummer Chris Hawk had been there since the very beginning, since the Rocks magazine ads, since the Damascus House, since the very first jam. He tracked the drums for Violence, but a serious medical condition made it impossible for him to tour in support of the album. He had to step away from the band he helped build from scratch. The extended writing process of their next record, reportedly stretching 9 months, became crucial for the band's personal dynamics. Relationships frayed, the emotional toll mounted. The drum seat was filled by Tommy Sickles, the same Tommy Sickles who had played in Ingredient 17 that we talked about at the beginning, alongside Matt Holt before Nothingface even existed, bringing the story full circle in a bittersweet way. Then in early 2001, bassist Bill Gall departed to pursue a career in music production and engineering. His replacement was Jerry Montano, formerly of the Deadlights. That stint, however, proved short-lived. Gall returned to the fold within a few months, stepping back into the lineup he'd helped found. But the revolving door of personnel was only the surface of what Nothingface was dealing with during 2001 to 2002, between Violence and their upcoming record. The band endured a run of personal catastrophes that would have shattered most groups' entirety. Matt Holt's home burned down, Tom Maxwell's mother passed away, and Bill Gall went through a divorce. 3 men, 3 devastating personal losses, all hitting roughly at the same moment. By their own accounts, the band came dangerously close at this time to calling it quits altogether. They pushed through all of it, and they did make another record, and so it just shows you how stubborn musicians are, and just shows you how music is everything to some of us, and you really push through, and it's a good way to get some of that angst and turmoil and frustration out into song form. Also, their label situation remained complicated. Being on MTV2 Records during the post-Napster implosion of the early 2000s music industry was its own kind of survival test. The ground beneath the music business had shifted permanently, and bands that should have broken through during 2001 to 2003 were caught in the undertow of collapsing infrastructure, shifting radio formats, and cultural backlash against nu metal specifically, a backlash that, justified or not, caught a lot of genuinely talented bands in its wake. Nothingface were exactly that kind of casualty. So this was a tough time because music started becoming free, and the labels that pushed a lot of bands relied on record sales. So you couldn't really tell if the band was selling records and you were gaining fans, but people weren't buying because they were getting free music on Napster. See a la Lars Ulrich in Metallica, because they're the ones that really made us think about it, which in turn was warranted. So let's get into the Swan Song, 2003. We're talking about Skeletons. It arrived on April 22, 2003. 23 years ago now, and it remains one of the most surprising and compelling final statements of any heavy band has ever made. After the relatively streamlined assault of Violence, the band arrived at Skeletons having burned through almost everything that made them a conventional commercial prospect. What they were left with was something rawer and more politically engaged than anything they previously released. With Tommy Sickles behind the kit, the record pulled from nu metal, punk metal, and hardcore in equal measure, with the genre lines dissolved almost entirely in favor of pure expression. Still metal at the end of the day, right? The lyrical content on Skeletons was also different. Earlier records had turned inward, personal trauma, emotional survival, identity. Skeleton turns its sights outward with barely restrained fury. The track Ether stands as one of the most direct political broadsides Nothingface ever committed to tape. and pointed a critique of George W. Bush's post-9/11 policies delivered with the intensity you expect from a band that has spent years being politely ignored by a system that preferred its heavy music toothless. Organized religion, government, outreach, and the machinery of American power, all in the crosshairs for Matt Holt's lyrics here. The album peaked at 125 on the Billboard 200, their highest mainstream chart position, and features 14 tracks across 50 minutes. Critical response highlighted its maturity and production quality as the high points. The band, in the midst of personal turmoil, industry friction, and just a lot of other shit going on, somehow managed to make their most outwardly accomplished and lyrically sophisticated record. It does say that, for me, it does say maturity in production. I just thought the drum mix on this was terrible and it lacked a lot of punch. But that summer, the band played on second stage of the popular Ozfest tour. They also played I Seen Him on Tattoo the Earth tour, which Tattoo the Earth was Slipknot, Slayer, Sepultura, Head PE, Hatebreed, Mudvayne. Too many to name, but that was an awesome tour. Also to note on Skeletons, Tommy Sickles, the drummer, the new drummer, came in and he actually wrote with some of the guitar parts and some of the arrangements on this album. So that did definitely attribute to some of the sound that is a little different on this one than the other ones. Says, however, the band dropped off Ozfest shortly before its intended due to numerous factors, including voice issues experienced by Matt Holt. It was also they were having trouble and didn't have the record support pushing them or financially backing them, so it's really hard to tour off nothing when you're not making a whole lot touring. So they had to pull from the tour, and it was disheartening for them, I know, because they didn't even get to play Ozfest, which was one of the biggest tours at the time. They didn't even get to play their own hometown during it. So, and then Nothingface disbanded on February 10th, 2004, citing musical differences and lack of support from their label, and then they were gone. So, the reunion. The first sign that Nothingface wasn't completely finished came on November 24th, 2005, when a posting on the Jägermeister website quietly listed the band as opening act for Disturbed in a 2006 show. The lineup for that appearance: Matt Holt, Tom Maxwell, Jerry Montano, and Tommy Sickles, confirmed the band was breathing again. They didn't stop there. 2 new songs surfaced online, and Nothingface hit the road for a small U.S. club tour that winter and into the spring, bringing Crossbreed and Silent Civilian along for the ride. It felt for the moment like the machine might actually crank on and back to life. Maxwell said in an interview that I checked out, he didn't think they were going to get back together at first. Quote, "We were so dysfunctional and unfocused that being in the same room with each other was painful and a bitter thought. Almost 2 years went by before myself and Matt even had a phone conversation, but time does heal and we have the scars to prove it." That was from metalunderground.net in a 2006 interview. But after that, then it imploded again. Jerry Montano was fired from the band after allegedly assaulting Tom Maxwell and making gun threats at the debut album party for Hell Yeah. We'll talk about that in a second. It was exactly the kind of chaotic, ugly endpoint that no one wants to write about, and the kind that Nothingface throughout their entire history could never quite escape. Just one of those bands just plagued to just always trudge through the mud and never quite get the due that they deserve. The second act of the reunion came in the spring of 2008, announced not through a press release, but through the language of MySpace. Oh, good old MySpace. A changed profile picture showing the band in the studio, a bulletin sent to fans. On May 20th, a short YouTube clip appeared of the band performing, and 4 days later, on May 24th, blabbermouth.net confirmed what fans had been hoping. Original members Bill Gall and Chris Hawk had rejoined Nothingface. Tommy Sickles, meanwhile, had moved to LA-based band Noise Within. So the classic lineup was back. Teaser videos trickled out over the following months, and in February 19, 2009, the band announced that they were Right Way Studios in Baltimore, Maryland for 2 weeks of writing and recording. On April 8, 2009, a remastered version of their self-titled debut was released with new artwork, a ceremonial act of reclaiming their own origin. But still, it was not enough. On August 14, 2009, blabbermouth.net reporting that Nothingface were disbanding again, this time for good. The final artifacts were raw and unpolished, which somehow made them more appropriate. On September 1st, 2009, the band posted 1,000 lies to their official website, a rough first draft demo recorded back in March 2008. On November 13, 2009, a second demo surfaced, D2, an untitled vocalist sketch, a ghost of a song that never got to actually become one. Hey, just real quick, wanted to jump in here and remind you guys that if you wanted bonus episodes or early ad-free episodes, you can join us on the Patreon. You can also join our Discord to be a part of the conversation, send us questions, and give us ideas for shows. And always, please subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening on your favorite platform, please give us 5 stars and tell us why you like the show. And always share with a friend, and we appreciate it. Much love. In early 2011, a brand new Nothingface.com launched, complete with a fan forum, photo gallery, wiki, guest book, and fan uploaded video section. It was a final gesture of community, a place for those people who had carried the band's name long after the band itself had gone quiet. The site has since been suspended for reasons that were never publicly explained, probably copyright issues. Even in silence, Nothingface couldn't quite let go. The final chapter of the Nothingface story is one of the hardest to write. Matt Holt, born May 28, 1977 in Washington, D.C., the voice that had defined the band from its earliest days, the kid who picked up guitar at 5 and a microphone at 16, passed away on April 15, 2017 in Frederick, Maryland. He was 39 years old. The cause was degenerative illness, widely speculated to have been ALS, though never publicly confirmed in official terms. His obituary, filed through Stafford Funeral Home, described him with a fullness of life beyond the stage. He was a history buff, a gamer, a Washington Redskins and New York Yankees fan, a son, a brother, and he was survived by his parents, Frank and Irene, and his brother, Chris. Also, I remember back in the day, my cousin seen Nothingface, and he turned me on to them, and he got to go hang out with them guys on their bus, and he talked with Matt, and Matt was talking at that time that if he wasn't in a band, he would be a baseball player because he had a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. I remember him telling me that. He said he probably could at least played the minor leagues, so that's probably why he was such a big New York Yankees fan, because he was a baseball player himself. The metal community responded with genuine, widespread grief, and with something that felt like overdue recognition, Invisible Oranges ran a tribute arguing for a full reassessment of Holt's contributions to metal and of the genre prejudice that had kept bands like Nothingface from receiving the critical respect they'd earned. Toilet of Hell published a remembrance that described his vocals as an emotional touchstone for countless listeners who found catharsis in exactly the kind of heavy music that critics had reflexively dismissed. He was, without question, one of the more talented and emotionally honest vocals in his era. The fact that his name isn't spoken in the same breath as contemporaries from bigger selling bands is a story about the music industry, not about him. And sometimes you just don't get your due, even if you're as great as he was. So, a little life after Nothingface. The members of Nothingface didn't disappear when the band went dark. They scattered into new projects, some fleeting, some significant, and one that would make genuine noise on the national stage. Bill Gall stepped into a new chapter by co-founding Kingdom of Snakes alongside former members of Gunfighter. The band's debut EP carried a notable piece of Nothingface DNA. Matt Holt contributed vocals on one of the tracks, a reminder that the bond between those two ran deeper than any official lineup could contain. In early 2004, Gall and Holt announced they were joining forces in a new project called Perfect Enemy, a pairing that made sense given everything they've been through together. Meanwhile, Tom Maxwell and Tommy Sickles were moving into their own direction, announcing a new band called Cold White Christ along Jerry Montano and Mudvayne frontman Chad Gray. That configuration didn't last long. Prior commitments pulled Gray away before it could gain any traction. The remaining core of Maxwell, Sickles, and Montano regrouped and rebanded, eventually landing on Sever, which later evolved into Blessed in Black, with the addition of ex-Scrape vocalist Billy Keaton. Keaton exited by late 2005, and the band dissolved shortly after, another promising vehicle that never quite made it to the highway. The most consequential post-Nothingface development came in 2005 when Tom Maxwell and Jerry Montano joined forces with Vinnie Paul, the legendary drummer and co-founder of Pantera and Damage Plan, along with Chad Gray and Greg Tribbett of Mudvayne to form Hell Yeah. The supergroup pedigree alone was enough to turn heads across the metal world. Their debut album dropped April 10, 2007 through Epic Records to a considerable fan base. Jerry Montano did not survive the album's release party. His drunken gun threats that night, the same incident that would later end his tenure in Nothingface's reunion, got him fired from Hell Yeah before the ink on the deal was even dried. It was a spectacular and self-inflicted exit from not one but two bands, and it marked the effective end of Montano's chapter in the Nothingface orbit. Tom Maxwell, for his part, stayed with Hell Yeah and built something real, proof that even after Nothingface, his best work wasn't necessarily behind him. I guess that's all to the ear of the beholder, right? I mean, there was a lot of Hell Yeah fans, and it was probably the most successful thing, probably because of the supergroup aspect. I don't know that much about Hell Yeah to say one or another. I know I've heard a few songs, and maybe just because it wasn't Pantera or Nothingface, I didn't care, or even Mudvayne for that matter. Maybe it's a band I need to go back and listen to. Maybe it'll grow on me. Not real sure. Still was no Nothingface, I'll tell you that. So wrapping up here, the legacy of Nothingface. They were a DC, Maryland band who bridged the gap between the region's hardcore roots and the heavy mainstream without compromising the authenticity of either. They produced 4 studio albums of consistently high quality, at least 2 of which, an audio guide of Everyday Atrocity and Skeletons, belong on any serious examination of where early 2000s heavy music actually went when it was being made by people who meant it. They toured with Pantera, they played Ozfest, they played Tattoo the Earth, they charted, they inspired legions of listeners who still put those records out 20 plus years later and wonder how the world missed it. What undid them wasn't a lack of talent or lack of work ethic, it was the collision of internal turbulence, a music industry in free fall, a genre that became culturally radioactive almost overnight, and a slow, terrible progression of disease that took their frontman far too young. I will say, too, nu metal had a massive rise and a massive fall, and if you were considered in that nu metal box, I think that was one of the major factors because they just got scraped into nu metal, but they were just metal. So that didn't help because a lot of nu metal bands, and they were considering even some of these crappy bands nu metal. So nu metal just got lumped into all of this stuff. Granted, nu metal's making a resurgence. There are nu metal bands like Korn who they never stopped, and they're still doing their thing, and they're still kicking ass today. But bands like, Slipknot kind of came through and took that nu metal and kind of brought metal back from the ashes, so to speak, of the whole nu metal thing. Now, granted, I know there was other things going on. Death metal was still there, but I'm just saying in the popular eye, Slipknot trying to make nu metal heavier but have those elements, I think really shone a light on getting some of those fans over to some of the heavier of metal. So Tom Maxwell, Bill Gull, and their collaborators left behind a body of work that rewards deep listening. Matt Holt left behind a vocal catalog that should be studied alongside any serious discussion of what made the turn of millennium heavy scene significant. Nothingface were never the biggest band in any room they played, but for the people who found them, like myself, and held on, like myself, they were the most important. Absolutely love Nothingface. So their discography real quick, I suggest you go listen to all this stuff. Nothingface 1995, debut self-released independent, Pacifier 96-97, Decide Templar, an audio guide to Everyday Atrocity, September 22nd, 1998, Decide Templar, Violence, June 5th, 2000, TVT Records, Skeletons, April 22nd, 2003, TVT Records, and then the Nothingface that came out in 95 was remastered in 2009. Absolutely love this band. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. I would say go check them out. Just give you a little history about the band. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot out there because, like I said, around this 2000s era, trying to capture, there wasn't blogs and interviewers and all this. There was few doing it, and there are a few things you can pick through out there, but there just wasn't enough out there to really dive into this band. Also, their music speaks for itself, so go check it out. If I was going to say anything, make sure you check out my episode coming up about me ranking these albums. I won't give you the one you should go listen to now, because you should go listen to my episode, and then that can give you which one to listen to. But go listen to them all. Go enjoy Nothingface. Tell me what you think about them. Tell me what your favorite memory of Nothingface was below, whether you've seen them, what your favorite album was, how it changed you, because we had a really good conversation going on around these guys before, so I thought this would be good for a little fuller-length episode. And as always, y'all, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please give us a review over on your streaming platform if you're listening, because we appreciate that. Join us over on Patreon if you want to support the show. You do get bonus episodes and early episodes, and hit us up with the Discord. All these links are below. We appreciate your support. Appreciate you all listening. And until next time, y'all, much love. Keep it metal. Thank you so much for checking out the episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps our channel grow. If you want to be notified when a new episode comes out every Tuesday or a bonus episode, hit that bell so you can be alerted of that. Also, if you're just listening to the show, please consider taking a couple seconds to give us a 5-star review over on your favorite platform. We really appreciate that, and it does go a long way. Share the show with a friend if you discovered a new band or like what we do here. And if you want bonus content and early episodes, you can go over and support us on Patreon to keep this show going and help build this show bigger than what it is, and I really appreciate that. A lot goes into this show, so that helps us out a ton. And if you want to join the community, there's a Discord link below. It's free to join. You can pop on in. We can keep the conversation going over there. Also, shout out to Josh Hibbs and our sponsor, Dave Stark at Stark Realty, for making this show possible. And much love. Keep it metal. Thank you.